The order came through at 3:40, garbled enough that I had to play it back twice. All forward units consolidate at Bravo Ridge by 500. Evacuation window closes at 5:15. Noncompliance will be logged as desertion. Noncompliance, that was the word they used. I was 4 kilometers south of Bravo Ridge with a blown knee brace, a scout drone that had taken a spore cloud hit and was navigating in loose circles around my left boot, and a Vethian village that had stopped burning 20 minutes ago and was now just smoking. The smoke was a particular color, orange and low, the kind that happens when compression shelters collapse inward. I'd seen it twice before, once on Kale Station. Once in the 3rd district of Marit's Landing, after the conclave finished with it. I knew what that smoke meant. I also knew what 5:15 meant. I stood there for about 30 seconds doing the math that soldiers do. 4 kilometers, blown knee brace, 500. The math said, move now, stop for nothing, make the window. Then I heard the sound. You have to understand something about Vethian children. They're distress calls, and I use that phrase deliberately because the sound is not quite a cry the way human children cry, are subsonic at the base and harmonic at the peak. What you hear, if you're human, is a low thrumming under your sternum followed by a kind of tonal squeak at the top, like a kettle that hasn't quite decided to boil. Your body registers it before your brain does. Your chest tightens. Something old in your brainstem says, something small is in pain. Evolution didn't wire that response to a specific species. It just wired it to small and suffering and alone. I heard the sound once. I stood there. I've heard it again. I said something under my breath that isn't worth repeating, and I turned south, away from Bravo Ridge, and I started moving toward the smoke. The settlement was called Veth Salar, or that was the closest human phonetics could manage. It had been a mid-tier agricultural collective, 40 or 50 structures of woven root timber and compacted clay terraced down a hillside into a creek valley. The Vethian Protectorate had marked it as a civilian zone. The conclave hadn't agreed, or hadn't cared, or had simply had a targeting error, which in my experience means someone decided the error was acceptable. Most of it was rubble. I moved through the outer ring carefully, because compression collapse leaves unpredictable voids, and I couldn't afford to drop a leg through a false floor with 4 kilometers still between me and extraction. My knee brace was locked in extension, which made me walk like I had a plank strapped to my thigh, but it held my weight. I kept my light low and diffuse. The drone wobbled along behind me, its sensor array half-blind, contributing almost nothing except the occasional ghost ping on its radar that might have been a falling beam or might have been something alive. I'd learned to read its error states over the course of the last 8 hours, and this particular wobble meant, uncertain, proceed with caution, which was always good advice. The settlement's outer ring had been a perimeter of storage buildings, clay-walled, low-roofed, built to hold harvested crop root through the monsoon season. Most of them had come down. One had not. A squat, thick-walled granary on the upslope side of the ring, built heavier than the others, designed to resist the weight of grain stacked to the ceiling. The granary's roof had partially caved inward at one corner, but the walls had held, and the angle of the roof collapse had created a sealed pocket at the base of the far wall. The sound was coming from inside. I found the gap in the rubble almost by feel. A slant of fallen roof beam had created a pocket, maybe 1.5 meters across at the widest, tapering to nothing at the back. Whoever was inside had pushed as far into the taper as they could get. I went down on my stomach, which was unpleasant in the way that going down on your stomach onto rubble is always unpleasant. I brought my light to minimum and pointed it inward. A pair of eyes caught it. Vethian eyes are not like human eyes. The sclera, the white part in humans, is black in Vethians, a dense matte black like good carbon fiber. The iris is amber or gold or occasionally a deep copper, and it has a structure more like a cat's than a human's, though the pupil is round. In near darkness, with the light hitting them at the right angle, they catch and hold illumination the way a candle holds wind. You see the flame inside, not just the surface. She was very small. I put her at 6 or 7 standard years, which in Vethian developmental terms is closer to 4 or 5 human years. Her skin was the iridescent copper green that Vethians carry in youth, before the green deepens and the copper fades with age. She was pressed into the back of the void with both arms around her knees, and she had the look that children in Rubble always have. Not panic, because panic takes energy she no longer had, but a kind of flat, compressed endurance, like she had decided to simply wait and see if the universe planned to continue. On her shoulders, folded down tight against her back, were the small spines that Vethian children carry in the first decade. Flight reflex. They go flat in the presence of threat, reducing profile. Hers were about as flat as I'd ever seen spines go. They were pressed so hard against her back they'd left marks in the fabric of her shift. I didn't speak. I just kept the light low and let her look at me. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said something in Vethian. My translation implant processed it with a 3-second lag and a confidence rating of 67%, which meant I should treat it as approximate. What it gave me was, "You are not the ones who make fire from the sky." "No," I said, "I'm not." She looked at me for another long moment. Then she uncurled slightly, not all the way, just enough to shift her weight onto her knees instead of her feet. She was testing, seeing if I moved. I didn't move. She said something else. The implant gave me, everyone else left. "I know," I said, "I'm not leaving yet." Getting her out took 11 minutes and most of my patience. She would move when I wasn't looking at her and stop when I turned back. She tested every surface before trusting it. She tracked my hands constantly, checking that they stayed where she could see them. These are not irrational behaviors in a small organism who has just spent however many hours in a collapsed structure after watching her settlement get destroyed. These are extremely rational behaviors. I didn't rush her. When she finally came out of the gap, low and fast and sideways, like a startled animal clearing a snare, she didn't come toward me. She went perpendicular to the nearest solid wall and pressed her back to it and looked at me from there. I sat back on my heels, which was easier said than done with the locked knee, and I waited. She was filthy. There was clay dust in her hair. Vethians carry their hair in tight, interlocking rows by cultural tradition, and the rows were caked white with debris. She had a cut above her left eye that had bled and dried and bled again. Her outer garment, a kind of wraparound shift in a dark green weave, had a tear along the left side from shoulder to hip, and through the tear I could see a bruise the size of my fist spreading across her ribs. She was barefoot, which was normal for Vethian children under 10. They don't develop the necessary sole calluses until late childhood, and soft earth doesn't require protection. But this wasn't soft earth anymore. This was rubble and compacted clay, and the fragments of root timber that had shattered under the collapse. She was also, now that I could see her clearly, looking at me with an expression I recognized. Not fear, not anymore. She'd already had the fear. This was the thing that comes after fear, when the fear has been running too long and the body can't maintain it, a kind of grim assessment. She was deciding whether I was a threat or a resource. I took my ration pack off my belt. Vethian metabolisms will tolerate human standard emergency rations. It had been in the coalition briefing, one of the few things about Vethian biology we'd actually been told. I held it out. She didn't take it. I set it on the ground between us and moved my hand back. She waited about 30 seconds. Then she crossed to it in 3 quick steps, snatched it up, retreated to her wall, and ate it in what I can only describe as a controlled frenzy. Not messy, not frantic, very fast, as if she decided to commit to the act fully and then be done with it. She ate with both hands and didn't take her eyes off me the whole time. When she finished, she looked at me again. Then she said something, and the implant gave me, at 71% confidence, "Where are you going?" "North," I said. I didn't have a word for extraction point that would translate. "There's a place where people are leaving the planet. I'm going there." She was quiet for a moment. The amber eyes moved to the gap in the rubble, then back to me. She was doing math of her own. "Will they let me come?" I looked at her. The extraction window was at 5:15. It was now 4:07. I had 4.5 kilometers to cover in an hour and 8 minutes, on a blown knee brace, through terrain that had just been through an orbital strike, with a child who was barefoot and 6 years old. The math was not good. The math had also not been good at 3:40, and I had still turned south. "Yes," I said, "they'll let you come." I didn't know if that was true, but there are things you say to children in Rubble and things you don't. "I want to tell you that the trek north was manageable. That would be a lie." The first kilometer was through the settlement's outer ring, which was the worst of it. Compression collapse leaves terrain that doesn't behave the way terrain is supposed to behave. Ground that looks solid drops 2 centimeters without warning. Beams that look stable shift when you put weight on them. The dust gets into everything. Your eyes, your implant sensors, the gap between your knee brace and your leg where the padding has worn through. I moved slowly and I moved carefully, and the girl, I didn't know her name yet. We hadn't exchanged names, moved behind me and matched my pace exactly, which told me something about her. She was watching my feet and learning the read. She fell once. Not badly. She went down on one knee on a section of collapsed clay floor that gave way wrong, and she made a sharp, involuntary sound and caught herself on her hands. I turned, and she was already standing, her palms skinned, looking at the ground with an expression that was not about the pain but about the error. The way a child looks when they have decided to be competent and have briefly failed to be. I held out my hand. She looked at it for a moment, assessing, as she assessed everything, and then took it, and we navigated the next 20 meters with her hand in mine, which helped, and then she let go when the ground evened out, which was the right call. The second kilometer was better. We were into the forested buffer zone around the settlement, which had been partially scorched but hadn't collapsed. The Vethian ironwood trees in the buffer zone had held. Those things are built to weather the monsoons that come off the eastern ridge 4 months of the year, and an orbital strike apparently falls somewhere below a full monsoon season on their list of concerns. The canopy was still mostly intact, which meant the ground was the familiar deep litter of leaf fall and fallen root bark, uneven but predictable. I set a pace I could sustain. The girl kept up without complaint. My drone, navigating on whatever sensor capacity it had left, caught up with us in the buffer zone and latched onto my shoulder pauldron with its magnetic grip, which was where it rode when it had given up on independent flight. It was still transmitting, weakly, to my wrist display, and what it was giving me was mostly noise and one intermittent ghost ping that might have been a conclave patrol element 300 meters northeast. I steered us west to give it room. It was in the 3rd kilometer that she spoke again. "What is your name?" Not the implant's approximation, this was Galactic Standard, accented but clear. I stopped. "Rowe," I said. "Davin Rowe, Corporal." I paused. "You speak Standard." "Settlement school," she said. "We learn it in 2nd cycle." She looked up at me. The amber eyes were still doing that thing in the dark, holding light that wasn't quite there. "My name is Ussel Vel Soth Irene." "Ussel," I said. The name was 2 syllables, the first higher than the second. I tried it again, and she nodded, which I took to mean close enough. She seemed to be testing how it sounded in my pronunciation. Whatever she concluded, she let it stand. "Corporal Rowe," she said, "your leg is not working correctly." "It's working well enough." "You are making a sound when it bends." I was. The brace made a faint clicking on flexion, which I had been ignoring for the past 90 minutes. It was not a sound that indicated structural failure. Structural failure sounds different, I know from experience. but it was the sound of a pivot housing that had taken debris impact and was not seating cleanly on the return stroke. It would hold. "It's fine." She looked at me with an expression that, on a Vethian face with those flat black sclera and copper-green skin, managed to convey a very precise human sentiment, which was, "I disagree, but I will not argue, because arguing would take time we do not have." We kept moving. The 4th kilometer began to climb. The ridge that Bravo Ridge sat on rose steeply from the eastern side, and the most direct route north took us up through a series of switchbacks in the tree line. This was where the knee brace began to genuinely complain. I could feel the vibration of the misaligned pivot through my whole leg on each step, a dull secondary impact stacked on the primary one. I kept my cadence even and my breathing steady, because cadence and breathing are the things you control when the terrain decides to be unkind. Behind me, Ussel was silent. She was watching my feet, I knew, because I could hear when she mirrored my footfalls and when she chose a different line. She was learning the logic of how I read the ground, wait the uphill foot before committing, look 2 paces ahead, don't trust anything that gleams. She was a fast learner. Children who have survived a compression collapse and a long walk through post-strike terrain in the dark tend to be. Halfway up the switchbacks, she said, "Corporal Rowe." "Yeah. Why did you come back for me?" I didn't break stride. "I heard you." There were others who heard. Her standard was careful and deliberate, each word placed with consideration. "I made the sound for a long time before you came. No one came." I didn't have a clean answer to that. What I had was the 30 seconds of math at 340, and the thing that had happened at the end of the 30 seconds that wasn't a calculation so much as a recognition. That I was the kind of person who turned south, or I was the kind of person who didn't, and I had never been the second kind, and that wasn't going to change because of a window at 5:15. "Some people," I said, "hear something and they decide it's not their problem. And you did not." "No." She was quiet for a few steps. "Why?" "I don't know how to be the other kind," I said. "Never learned." She thought about that. I could hear it in the pause before her next footfall, the slight hitch of processing. "My mother," she said finally, "said that most people learn to be the kind that walks past. She said it is taught, not born." She sounded like she was right. She usually was. The words were even. Not flat, not the false evenness of someone suppressing something, but the particular quiet of a child who has been carrying something too heavy for too many hours and has learned to hold it at a precise angle to keep it from spilling. I did not ask about her mother, not then. We climbed. The conclave skirmishers found us at the 3.4-kilometer mark, in the middle stretch of the switchback climb. I want to be precise about what happened, because in the after-action reports, the ones I eventually had to file, the ones that were filed about me, there is a version of this that sounds more dramatic than it was. What happened was not a firefight. What happened was that I heard them before I saw them, because the ground cover had thickened as we climbed, and the aerial sensor ghost that my damaged drone was still. Erratically, reporting had sharpened from intermittent to persistent. It had been a patrol element to the northeast, and they had swung south. I had maybe 3 seconds. I pulled Ussel off the path and into the root hollow of one of the large Vethian ironwood trees. The trunks on those things are 6 or 7 meters in diameter, and they send massive buttress roots out in all directions, and between the buttresses there are pockets that are effectively small caves, dry and dark and deep. I put her in one and put my back to her and went still. She understood immediately. The shoulder spines went flat. She made herself as small as she could get, tucking knees to chest, pressing back into the hollow's deepest point. She did not make a sound, not the kettle sound, not any sound at all. She had gone into the same state of compressed waiting she'd been in when I found her in the granary, except this time it was deliberate, chosen. She had looked at the situation and chosen silence the way a trained soldier chooses ground. The skirmishers, 4 of them, conclave militia rather than conclave regular forces, which meant they were moving without proper sensor sweeps and with a discipline level several grades below what the regulars carried, came through on the path 30 meters uphill from us. They were moving fast and not looking carefully, which was not good tactical practice, but which, in that moment, I was grateful for. I tracked them by sound. Heavy equipment, 2 of them on the uphill side. Lighter footfalls, 2 more flanking. They were covering ground, not searching. Moving through. They passed. We waited 3 minutes without speaking, then 2 more minutes. Then Ussel said, very quietly, directly into the space near my shoulder, "They are gone. I can tell by the sound they make in the brush." I hadn't known Vethians had better low-frequency directional hearing than humans. It wasn't in the briefing. I filed it away under things the briefing hadn't covered, which was a long list. "Thank you," I said. She said nothing, but when I moved out of the root hollow and back onto the path, she was exactly 2 paces behind me. She stayed at 2 paces for the rest of the climb, not close enough that she would slow my reaction if I had to move fast, not far enough that I would lose her in the dark. It was an exact distance, considered and maintained. She had placed herself the way a soldier places themselves. I didn't say anything about it. But I noticed. 6 minutes to window close, we came over the top of the ridge. Below us, the Bravo Ridge LZ was a controlled chaos. 2 heavy-lift transports, loading ramps down, the last of the infantry elements funneling aboard in the organized hurry that evacs always become at the end. Arc lights had been deployed around the perimeter, flooding the LZ in a white-blue that made the darkness outside it absolute by contrast. There was a security ring at the perimeter, armed and alert, and beyond the security ring there were Vethian civilians, 15 or 20 visible, maybe more in the darkness behind them, pressing at the barrier. Their voices didn't carry, but the movement did. Shoulders, arms, hands flat on the barrier's frame. The security was not letting them through. I looked at this for about 4 seconds, then I looked at Ussel. She was looking at the Vethian civilians. Her expression was unreadable in the way that Vethian expressions in profile can be. The flat black sclera give nothing away from the side. But the shoulder spines, which had been at 2/3 mast since we cleared the root hollow, were fully upright. Not flat, not the fear flat, the alert up. She was taking it in and deciding what it meant. "Stay behind me," I said. "Don't stop moving. If someone grabs you, make noise, all the noise you can make." She looked at me direct and clear. Then she gave me a single, precise nod, small and definite. The spine stayed up. We went down the ridge. The sergeant at the perimeter barrier was a man named Cullies, whom I knew slightly from the advanced staging on Vethi's IV. He was running the perimeter security with the particular focused exhaustion of someone who has been doing a difficult job well for too long and knows he needs to keep doing it for 15 more minutes. He saw me coming from 30 meters and his expression went through several distinct phases. Recognition, and then the particular relief of seeing someone logged as MIA walk in on their own feet, and then something more complicated when he saw what was 2 paces behind me. "Ro Jesus, we logged you MIA." "I'm not missing," I said. "I'm right here, she's with me." Cullies looked at Ussel. Ussel looked back at him, level and unblinking, the shoulder spines fully up. In the arc light she looked smaller than she had in the dark, and the bruise across her ribs showed through the torn shift, and the dried blood above her eye had smeared across her cheekbone, where she'd rubbed it at some point in the last kilometer. "Ro, the directive is personnel only. We can't." "She's personnel," I said. "She's a minor in a conflict zone with no adult guardian present. Coalition Child Protection Protocols, Section 4, Paragraph 2, minors in conflict zones without adult custodians supersede theater-level extraction directives. Log it however you want. She's coming with me." I knew the protocols. I had read them once years ago, During a training rotation I had slept through most of. It turned out I had retained enough. Or at least enough to say it with the particular kind of flat certainty that, in my experience, makes people decide that the person saying it knows what they're talking about. Cully's was tired. He was also not a bad person, and the bruise on Ussel's ribs was visible in the arc light, and the 6 years of her were standing 2 paces behind me with her shoulder spines fully up and her amber eyes steady on him. He looked at me, he looked at Ussel, he looked at his timer. "Get on the transport," he said. The heavy lift was loud and smelled of hydraulic fluid and the particular kind of collective human stress that accumulates in enclosed spaces during combat operations. Every seat was taken. We were 6 minutes past window close. The ramp was already beginning to rise when the loadmaster waved us in, and we made it aboard with 30 seconds to spare and nowhere to sit, which was fine. Ussel and I ended up on the floor of the cargo bay, backs to the forward bulkhead, between a medkit rack and a crate of equipment somebody hadn't managed to properly stow. She sat very close, not touching. She maintained a precise few centimeters of distance, which I learned later is a Vethian social courtesy, or perhaps a propriety. You do not press against someone's body unless they have indicated the contact is welcome. But close enough that I could feel the warmth of her, the small weight of her presence beside me in the dark of the bay. The ramp came up, the engines hit full thrust, we lifted. The G-force pushed us into the bulkhead and stayed there for a long time. The heavy lifts accelerate hard, burning for altitude because the upper atmosphere on Vethai's IV is where the Conclave's secondary weapons grid operates, and you want to be through it fast or not at all. The crate beside us groaned and shifted against its restraints. Someone across the bay was reciting something under their breath, quietly, which was a prayer or a habit or both. And then we were through it, and the acceleration eased, and the stars came through the hull cameras on the display at the far end of the cargo bay, distant and cold and uncountable. I didn't realize until the lurch of level flight that I had been holding my breath since the ridge. I let it out. Beside me, Ussel let out a sound I could not fully hear but could feel, a subsonic something, brief, barely there, like a note held and then released into the air. The shoulder spines went flat against her back. All the way flat this time. Not fear flat the other kind, the kind I hadn't seen until now. Rest flat, fully down, the way they go when the body has decided that the threat is genuinely over and it can stop spending the energy of readiness. She was still for a long moment. Then she looked up at the display, at the stars coming through on the hull cameras, and she was quiet for a very long time. I let her be quiet. There was nothing to say that she didn't already know. Eventually she said, "Corporal Rowe." "Yeah. You said they would let me come." "They let you come." "You did not know if that was true when you said it." I looked at her. In the dim cargo bay light, those amber eyes were steady on me, without accusation, just noting, cataloging. She had a way of looking at a thing until she understood it. "No," I said, "I didn't." "But you said it anyway." "Yes." She considered this. The transport bucked slightly as we cleared the upper atmosphere. The hull groaned once, and someone across the bay swore at a volume that was technically unprofessional, and I thought about the question and what the answer actually was. My grandmother had told me once, when I was young and certain about things that turned out to be more complicated than they seemed. The reason you say the thing before it's true is not to fool the other person. It's to make a promise to yourself, out loud, with a witness. Say it, and then you have to make it real. The saying is the commitment. She was not a philosopher. She was a woman who had lived a long life in difficult places and had distilled it down into things that were short enough to say in a doorway. "Because I was going to make it true," I said. "And sometimes you have to say the thing before you've done it, so you've promised." Ussel thought about that. The stars in the display drifted as the transport oriented on the carrier's position. She looked at them, and then she looked at me. "In our language," she said finally, "there is a word for that, what you did. saying the true to come before it is true. She paused, and I could hear her searching in Standard for something that wasn't there. We do not have a good translation. It is something like, the thing that earns trust before the trust has been given. When you say what you will do and the saying makes it owed. She paused again. We consider it serious. To say it carelessly is a kind of damage. That's a good word to have, I said. Yes, she said, it is. Another silence. The cargo bay had begun to settle into the particular quiet of people who have collectively been through something, and are now processing it in whatever way they process things. Across from us, 2 soldiers were asleep. One was staring at the ceiling. Someone was crying very quietly and trying not to. Corporal Rowe, Ussel said. Yeah. My mother did not come out. No, I said, I'm sorry. She was quiet for a moment. The shoulder spines, fully flat, did not move. I know she did not come out because I heard it happen. I was in the granary and I heard the second strike, and then I did not hear her anymore. She said it carefully, each word in its place. I have been thinking about it for all the time in the rubble. I understand what it means. Yes, I said. I do not want you to tell me that it will be all right. I know what things are true. Okay. I only wanted to say it, so that it had been said. I heard you, I said. She nodded once. And then she turned back to the stars on the display, and she was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I thought she had decided to sleep, which was the right call and which I would not have interrupted. But she was not sleeping. She was looking. After a while she said, Are there very many stars? Yes. My mother told me that each one has a name in the oldest Vethian counting, that the settlement keepers were given a star to hold in memory for the settlement, and the name of the star was the settlement's second name, its name in the sky. She paused. She knew which star was Veth Solar's. I do not. She had not taught me yet. She paused again. I think she was going to teach me when I was older. I did not say anything. I will learn it, she said, not to me exactly. More to the fact of it, the way you speak to a thing you have decided about. When I am older and there is someone who knows the counting, I will learn it. I will find Veth Solar's star. She turned from the display and looked at me, and the amber eyes were very steady. Is that a foolish thing? No, I said. That's exactly the right kind of thing. She turned back to the stars. After another while, she did sleep, leaning very slightly against the equipment crate that had been wedged between us. She did not quite touch me. 2 centimeters of Vethian courtesy maintained even in sleep. I watched the stars with her until she was fully under. And then I said nothing else, because there was nothing else that was mine to say. The field hospital at Ray Station was where they processed the Vethi's IV evacuation, human military on one side, Vethian civilian relief on the other, and a narrow corridor of bureaucratic chaos in between where the 2 sides tried to figure out what to do with the cases that didn't fit neatly into either category. I was a case that didn't fit neatly. Logged MIA, now present, technically in violation of the 515 extraction directive, now arrived on the 517 transport. Minor combatant in a theater I was no longer supposed to be in. Now, at a relief station with a Vethian child I had no official custody over and no paperwork to explain. The base operations officer who came to process my case was a Lieutenant Heron, who had the manner of someone who had been processing complicated cases for 4 days running and had begun to find the complication personally offensive. She was not unkind. She was simply at the end of a very long rope with the general category of things that did not fit. Corporal Rowe, she said, looking at her tablet, you were logged MIA at 5:05. You arrived on the 517 transport. You are listed as the guardian of a Vethian minor, filed by Sergeant Cullies at the perimeter barrier under Coalition Protection Protocols, Section 4. Do you want to explain what happened? I heard a child in the rubble of Veth Solar, I said. I went and got her. We walked north. We made the transport. Heron looked up from her tablet and looked at me. The extraction window closed at 5:15. We made it by 5:17. That is not the same thing as making it. We're here, I said. She's here. I'd call that the thing that matters. Harren looked like she had several responses to this, and was selecting among them by elimination. She looked at Ussel, who was seated in the chair beside mine, bandaged above the eye now by the intake medic, her feet in soft-soled slippers that were 4 sizes too large because the medic hadn't had anything smaller. She was sitting with her hands folded in her lap and looking at Harren with the amber-eye steadiness that she brought to most things. Before Harren could arrive at her selected response, the door behind her opened. The woman who came through the door was Vethian. Tall for a Vethian woman, they run shorter than humans as a rule, but she had several centimeters on me when she straightened, with skin that had deepened from the copper green of youth into a rich malachite, the amber eyes carrying the same structural depth as Ussel's but stiller, steadier. She had the particular quality of someone who has been very frightened for a very long time and has not yet allowed herself to stop being frightened, and who knows that she cannot afford to. She saw Ussel before anything else. Of course she did. Ussel made the subsonic sound, the full version of it this time, deep and harmonic and overwhelming in the chest, nothing like anything a human child produces, and nothing like the compressed, attenuated half version she'd been holding in the rubble. It hit the room like a dropped stone hits water, concentric and total. And the Vethian woman folded down around her before the sound had finished, both arms, down on her knees on the floor of the operations office with her face pressed to the top of Ussel's head, and the shoulder spines on Ussel's back went fully, completely, finally up, not alert up, but the kind that I only understood in retrospect. The fully raised signal of absolute safety, full presence, the body announcing, I am with the one I trust most. I looked away. Some things aren't yours to watch. When I looked back, the Vethian woman was standing, Ussel at her side with one hand locked around 2 of the woman's fingers. She was looking at me with an expression I could not fully read. I am Enith Velsoth Irene, she said. Her standard was very good, formal and precise, the kind that comes from professional use, not settlement school. I am the elder sister of Ussel's mother. Her mother is, she paused, and the pause carried everything that it needed to. Her mother did not survive the strike on Veth Salar. I'm sorry, I said. You retrieved her from the rubble. Yes. You carried her north to the extraction point, through 4 kilometers of post-strike terrain. She walked most of it herself. I paused. She's got good feet for rubble, better read than most soldiers I've worked with. Ussel at Enith's side said something in Vethian. Enith looked down at her and said something back, lower and careful. Then she looked back at me. She says you knew the ground and she followed your feet. She says you told her the extraction point would let her come before you knew if it was true, and that when you said it, you already meant to make it so. Enith's expression shifted by some fraction I couldn't name. She says you did not leave. The sound she made, I said. In the rubble, I heard it and I turned around. That's the whole story. Many people hear it, Enith said quietly. Not everyone turns around. I didn't have an answer for that. I looked at Harren, who had gone very still during all of this and was looking at her tablet without appearing to read it. I looked at Ussel, who was looking at me with those amber eyes. She needs rest, I said. She was in that compression pocket for at least 6 hours. Her ribs are bruised, possibly cracked. The intake medic flagged it for imaging. She walked 4 kilometers barefoot over rubble. She needs sleep and food and a Vethian doctor in that order. Yes, Enith said. She will have all of that. We have proper facilities here. She paused. Corporal Rowe, before you are processed and assigned, I need to tell you something about Ussel Velsoth Irene. I learned 3 things in the next 15 minutes. The first was that Ussel's mother, Soth Irene Velkorath, the name I had not known until Enith spoke it, had been the settlement keeper of Veth Salar, a role that carries, in Vethian social structure, a significance I had not been briefed on and would not have understood from a briefing anyway. The settlement keeper is not simply an administrator or a mayor or a headwoman. The role is hereditary, and it is ceremonially tied to what Enith called the founding line of that settlement's ground, a concept that doesn't translate exactly, but carries something of what humans mean by stewardship, and something of what they mean by consecrated, and something else that doesn't have a human equivalent, something to do with the idea that a settlement is a kind of promise made to the land and to the people in it, and the keeper is the person who holds the promise. In our law, Enith said, the settlement keeper cannot be replaced by appointment. The role passes through the maternal line. It is not given or taken. It is born into. The second thing was that Usul, as Soth Irene's only surviving child, was now, in the eyes of Vethian ceremonial law and Vethian social record, the settlement keeper of Vethsalar, even though Vethsalar no longer existed. In Vethian understanding, Enith explained, a settlement does not cease to exist when its structures are destroyed. It ceases to exist when its keeper formally releases the line. Until that moment, the settlement exists in the person who holds it. Usul was 6 years old, and she was holding a settlement in ash. I looked at her. She was looking at her aunt's hand, where her fingers were still wrapped around two of Enith's, and her face was doing the thing it had done in the rubble. The flat, compressed endurance of a person who understands their situation and has not yet decided what to do about it. The third thing was harder to translate. Enith took her time with it. There is a designation, she said, in our tradition, older than the founding lines, older than the settlements themselves, for those outside the line who protect the founding children, who act as. She paused for a long time. The standard I have does not have the word. The nearest I can give you is, the one who does not leave in the time when leaving would have cost them nothing. Ninthar, Usul said from beside her aunt. She was looking at me. Her standard was careful and clear. That is the word. It is an old word, Enith confirmed. It does not come with titles or lands or political weight. It is not a rank or a formal role. It is simply a truth that we record about a person, that this person was here in this moment and did not leave. She looked at me steadily. Usul Vel Soth Irene has named you Ninthar. I am her elder of line. I confirm it and I will record it. I looked at Usul. She looked back. The shoulder spines were fully flat, rest flat all the way down. The amber eyes were doing their thing. I just heard her in the rubble, I said. Yes, Enith said, you did, and you turned around. There was a long silence. Haran, across the room, was very carefully not looking at any of us. I'll take that, I said. The word, I'll take it. Usul nodded once, small and precise, the same nod she'd given me on the ridge. Haran finished processing me, eventually. The paperwork was extensive and took most of the next 2 hours. The violation of the extraction directive generated a formal notation in my service record, which I was told might affect my next rotation evaluation. I accepted this with equanimity. As it turned out, the Coalition's response to Haran's report, which included the Child Protection Protocol citation, the notation of Usul's status as a founding line minor under Vethian ceremonial law, and Enith Vel Soth Irene's witnessed confirmation of events, generated something considerably more extensive than a notation in my record. It generated a chain of communications between the Coalition's Vethian Liaison Office, the Vethian Protectorate's Relief Authority, and 3 levels of Coalition military command that took 5 days to resolve, and that I was not present for because I had been reassigned to the carrier meridian by then. What I know about how it resolved I know from the file I received 2 weeks later, which I read once and then filed. The short version, the formal notation about the extraction directive, was amended with a rider citing the protection protocols. The notation about my MIA status was closed and marked resolved. A separate commendation had been attached to my record by someone in the Coalition Relief Coordination Office at Ray Station. Lieutenant Harron, to her credit, said nothing about any of this. 2 days after the processing, when I ran into her in the station's refectory, she gave me a look that was considerably different from the one she had given me across the processing desk. She said, "I've seen the full file now," and she went and sat down. That was enough. The morning I was scheduled for transport back to the carrier fleet, I found Ussel in the medical wing's recovery area. She was in a cot that was too large for her, with a clean bandage above her left eye, and the clay dust finally washed out of her hair, which had been rebraided in the Vethian style, tighter at the top, looser toward the ends, the rows precisely even. She was holding a flat reader, working through something on its screen with the particular focus of a child who has decided to be competent and is executing on that decision. The bruised ribs had been imaged, cracked, 2 of them, which the Vethian doctor had wrapped and told her would ache for 3 weeks. She looked up when I came in. "Corporal Rowe." "Ussel." "Your transport is today. 900. She looked at the reader and then set it down with precision. "Where do you go?" "Carrier Meridian, then back to active deployment." "Probably Sector 7. I pulled a chair over and sat beside the cot, which was easier now that the knee brace had been properly serviced overnight. New pivot housing, new padding clicking gone. "You'll stay here for a while with your aunt. There's a relief program for Veth Solar families, housing and schooling and all the things." She nodded. She knew about the program. Enith had presumably told her, but she had asked anyway, in the way people sometimes ask things they already know the answer to, because the asking is not about the answer. "Ussel," I said, "what you called me Ninthar." "Yes." "Does it mean something changes, for you or for your line?" She considered the question, with the same gravity she had given everything since the Rubble. "It means," she said, "that you are written down in our record of the line in the founding memory, not in a book in the recited memory, the kind that is said aloud and passed on." She paused. "It is only a truth written in words people say, but we write carefully, we do not write carelessly." "I understand." "Do you?" She looked at me direct and clear. "You will go to other places, you will do other things, you may forget." "I won't forget." "You will not forget Veth Solar," she corrected gently. "That is not the same as not forgetting me." That landed precisely. She was 6 years old and she had already learned to be precise about the things that could hurt. "I won't forget you," I said. "That's the thing I can promise. Veth Solar, I'll carry that too, but you, Ussel." "I'll carry you." She looked at me for a long time. Outside the medical wing's window, Ray Station's artificial sunrise had begun, the lights on the exterior ring cycling up from dark to the warm gold of mid-morning, and in that light her copper-green skin had a warmth to it that it hadn't had in the dark on Vethai's IV. Then she reached over to the small tray beside her cot and picked up a flat disc, smooth, malachite green, about the size of my palm, with an easy weight to it. I recognized it as a Vethian waymarker. They are made from pressed settlement clay, fired hard, and used to mark the paths between settlements and the boundaries of a settlement's ground. This one had a pressed mark in the center, concentric rings around a small central point, the mark worn slightly soft at the edges from handling. "This is from Veth Solar," she said. "My mother made it. I had it in my pocket when the shelter fell. She held it out to me. I want you to have it." I looked at it. "That's yours, Ussel, from your mother." "I know." She held it a fraction further out, patient. "That is why." I took it. It was lighter than I expected, and smooth in a way that comes not from manufacturing but from years in a pocket, from being held and set down and picked up and held again. The clay was dark malachite, the same color as Enith's skin, which I supposed was not a coincidence. I reached into my own vest pocket. The compass, a physical one, old pattern, no electronics, the kind with a weighted needle sealed under glass that my grandmother had pressed into my hand the morning I enlisted. She'd said, "Electronics lie when they're scared. The Earth doesn't lie. It had been with me for 3 rotations on 4 different worlds. The case was brass, worn smooth on the side my thumb rested, and the glass had 1 hairline scratch from the same night the knee brace took its hit. I looked at it for a moment. Then I held it out. "This was my grandmother's," I said. "She gave it to me when I enlisted. It tells you which way is north wherever you are. The needle always settles." I paused. "If you're ever lost," pointed at the sky, "let the needle settle and walk toward something. The direction it gives you might not mean anything on an alien world, but it'll be a direction. Something to walk toward instead of standing still." She looked at it. Then she reached out and took it, carefully, both hands, the way you take something that is being trusted to you with intention. She turned it over. The needle swung free and settled. "Does it always settle?" she asked. "Always," I said. She closed her fingers around it and held it against her chest. The shoulder spines were fully flat. The amber eyes held whatever it is they held, that light that wasn't quite there. She said, "Ninthar." Quietly, not as a title, not as a dress, just as the word itself, said aloud. The way you say something when you want to make sure it exists in the air between you before it has to exist only in memory. "Usulvel soth Irene," I said. Her fingers stayed closed around the compass. I stood. I put the waymarker in my vest pocket, in the same place the compass had lived, where it fit with the ease of something that was supposed to be there. "Stay well," I said. She nodded once, small and definite. I walked out. Carrier Meridian Fleet. I held the waymarker from Veth Solar in my left hand for the first hour of the transit. It was smooth and light, and it smelled, very faintly, of clay and something else I couldn't identify, something like rain on warm stone, which was not a smell I had expected from a jungle world, but which I had perhaps expected from a settlement that had been, until 3 days ago, a home. My service record, when I eventually reviewed the updated version 2 weeks later, had a note I hadn't been told about. It was brief and formal and had been added by someone in the Coalition Relief Coordination Office at Ray Station, and it said, "Pervethian Founding Line Acknowledgement, witnessed and confirmed by Enith Vel Soth Irene, Elder of the Soth Irene Founding Line, CPL. D. Rowe is formally designated Ninthar to the Soth Irene Founding Line of Veth Solar. Coalition Protocol advises recording formal designations of Allied cultural significance in the permanent service record." I read it twice. Then I looked out the transit port at the stars, which were doing what stars do, being very far away and very numerous and very unconcerned with the small things that happen between them. I thought about the math at 340, 4 kilometers, blown knee brace, the window at 5:15. I thought about the math at 4:07, when I'd said yes, they'll let you come into a gap in the rubble to a pair of eyes that held light in the dark. I thought about the kind of person who turns south and the kind of person who doesn't. My grandmother had been the first kind. I had come to believe, over 3 rotations on 4 worlds, that you don't choose the kind you are so much as you discover it in the moments where you're doing the math, and you realize the math has never actually been the point. The waymarker was warm in my hand. Somewhere on Ray Station, a compass was pointing at something, some direction that meant nothing on that world, that corresponded to no landmark she knew, but that was a direction. Something to walk toward. She'd walk toward it. I knew she would. I knew it the same way I'd known at 4:07 that the extraction point would let her come, before the fact with intention said aloud. The kind of knowing that makes itself true. And